Morning, everyone. I'm Dean Boss. I'm the Sustainable Agriculture Educator for Michigan State University Extension. I'm a statewide educator and I work in cover crops and soil health. I'd like to welcome you to the Michigan State University Extension and MSU AgBioResearch virtual cover crops field day. This is the first virtual field day that we've done for cover crops, and we're glad that you could join us. When we normally do an in-person field day, it's pretty easy for you to look around and see who's in the audience, get an idea of who you're at the meeting with. Since that's difficult to do under the Zoom format, we're going to put up a poll with a couple of questions. And the reason for putting the poll up is so that we can give you an idea of who else might be participating with you in this meeting, and to gauge the cover crop use within the group that we have today. So Renee, if you could put that poll up, and as we ask that everybody take a minute and answer the two poll questions. And while you're doing that, I'm going to get started and go through today's agenda and some of the logistics for today. You know, we wish we could be meeting in person, but to protect the health and well-being of everyone in light of COVID-19, we're holding this field day virtually. Now, there are actually some advantages to holding a field day virtual. One of them is we don't have to worry about how the weather is going to affect us at the field day. And if you look outside right now, at least particularly here, it might be dicey if we were holding this field day outside. But second, and more importantly, is by meeting virtually, we're not limited geographically to what we can show you and who we can have talk to you from a single location. Meeting like this gives us the opportunity to go to a number of locations around the state and take a little more in-depth view of a topic. And so when we were, as a group, looking at what would be a timely topic to do that with, we're finding that planting cover crops after cash crop harvest continues to be a challenge for a lot of farmers. You're in a race against time, and let's be honest, with the climate in Michigan, depending on the type of year, you can have a very limited growing season after cash crop harvest. So farmers are beginning to talk a lot about ways to get their cover crops in earlier. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd like you to tell you to take a look at the Sustainable Ag Research and Education and Conservation Technology Information Center's recent National Cover Crop Survey. There were 1,000 farmers who answered that survey. And one of the things they found, which I found somewhat surprising, was that 50% of the farmers who responded to that survey are planting a portion of their cover crops prior to cash crop harvest. So we thought that this was a timely event and something that we wanted to bring to you. So for the first part of the program, we are going to take you to 5 locations around the state. You can see them on the map to your right. And there you'll hear from farmers and researchers about the practice of interseeding. You'll get to see equipment that's being used, and it's interesting. People are developing their own equipment to make interseeding possible, so you'll get to see some of that. And you'll get to hear a variety of perspectives on what works, what doesn't work, what the benefits are, and what some of the challenges are to interseeding prior to corn harvest. The other thing that we'd like to take an opportunity to do is to introduce you to the MSU Extension educators around the state that work in cover crops and are a resource to you. They're going to serve as your tour guides as we move from location to location. So as we go through this virtual tour, if you have questions, we would like you to put the questions in the chat box. To find the chat box, it's in the ribbon that pops up when you move your cursor. Click on chat and you should be able to enter your questions in that chat box. We will be monitoring those questions as the tour goes on, and then we will take some time after the tour to answer those questions. After the question and answer period, you're going to be placed in a breakout topic room, that the one that you chose at registration. There will be a specialist and a educator who will be leading a discussion about the use of cover crops in that topic area. This is an opportunity for you to get your questions answered, as well as hear from other participants about their questions and concerns and the input that they might be able to also provide on the topic. Those sessions are scheduled for 30 minutes, but you're more than welcome to go past the 30 minutes if you wish. We want everybody to have a chance to get all their questions answered during those sessions. So as part of this event, we have 2 restricted use pesticide recertification credits and 1.5 continuing education credits for certified crop advisors. To get those credits when you're in the breakout room, there will be a link placed in the chat box, and once you're done in the breakout room, that will end the field day and you can get on with your day. But we ask that you click on that link in the chat box. It will take you to an event evaluation, and after filling out the event evaluation, you'll receive the information for how to receive your credits. We'd like everyone, even if you're not getting credits, to go to that link and fill out the evaluation. Your input is really important to help us improve these field days and events in the future. So please take the time to fill that out and help us out with that. Following the event, you will receive an email, and in that email, you'll get a link to the field day and the map that you see to your right. This will give you an opportunity to visit one or all of the locations that we'll be talking about today. And I'd like to note that there is additional information will be posted at some of the locations that we did not have time to cover in the meeting today. In addition, you'll receive the link again to the survey and how to receive your credits. So if you don't get an opportunity to click on that link in the breakout room, you will receive it in the email. And again, we'd just like to encourage everybody to fill out that survey. So let's take a look at who we've got here today at the event. About 25% are full-time farmers, 12% are part-time farmers, so that's a total of 37% farmers. We've got 12% ag business professionals, 33% specialists and educators. We've got some agency representatives and just a couple of percent of people who are interested in agriculture. It looks like we've got a good diversity of participants, and hopefully that will lead to a lot of lively discussion in the topic and breakout rooms. So let's see what we got as far as cover crop use. We got 70% of the group uses cover crops, and we would hope after this event that the 31% that are not using cover crops will definitely start using them after the event. So if you have questions that can help you on that road, please ask the experts and work on your road to cover crop adoption. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd like to give a big thanks to the farmers, researchers, specialists, and educators who are bringing this event to you. I'd also like to acknowledge Liz Schultheis and Sarah Franchak from the cover crop team, and Renee Latowski from Ag and Natural Resource Communications. They're working behind the scenes to make all of this technology work for us during this virtual field day. I'm pleased to pass the lead to Christina Corral to start the interseeding tour. Christina?
Thank you, Dean. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christina Corral. I'm the statewide cover crop and soil health educator, and I'm housed in Lake County. I work with all growers, helping them to integrate cover crops into their system. Our first farm visit that we're going to go on today is in Lake County. We're going to visit Meadow Creek Ranch and Thornton Agriculture. They are in Lake, but they're just outside of Reed City. Meadow Creek Ranch is a 3-generation farm. They raise row crops such as corn and soybeans. They also have forages, and they also raise livestock, predominantly Angus and Longhorns. In their first year of using cover crops, they waited until the end of the season, just like everybody else, it seems. And what they found is they could only plant cereal rye because it was late October. So after gaining some experience in managing that cereal rye, they wanted to integrate to more cover crops, both as a monoculture, and they also wanted to put in some mixes so that they could achieve some of their soil health goals and other goals that they had in using cover crops. But in order to accomplish this goal, they needed to change how they incorporated the cover crops into the rotation. Recently, one of the farmers on the farm, Jack Thornton, he had an interview with NRCS, and he actually said his biggest challenge was getting them in early enough to grow to a certain maturity while they're actually doing something good. In this visit, Jack will be showing us equipment evolution and the experiences that they have with integrating cover crops into their systems. Welcome to Meadow Creek Ranch.
I'm Jack Thornton with Thornton Agriculture and Meadow Creek Ranch, and we're here today to talk about cover crops and ways to manage them with cattle and soil health. Today we're going to talk a little bit about cover crops and interseeding and kind of where we got started and where we're at today and different benefits and uses. So back probably 7-8 years ago, we heard all this about interseeding cover crops into corn, and we wanted to know if it worked. We wanted to know how it worked, if it worked, benefits of it. So that's where we started with this machine. Took an old wheel horse tractor and made it as small as we could to get it in between the corn rows. We first started when the corn was really tall, because that's kind of the idea back then is, you know, we got to put it in tall corn so we don't lose yield. So we got a windshield here to keep the corn leaves from beating you in the face, and just a little broadcast spreader on the back, and it would get about 3 rows. We could get down 3 rows. So we'd go down the field, come back and reload with seed. And it worked. So the next thought was, you know, can we do it earlier in the year? So we kept going earlier and earlier and earlier. Before you know it, we probably didn't even need the windshield, and we weren't seeing any yield decreases from the cover crops in our check rows. So that's kind of when we went over to this piece of equipment to change things up. You know, this one's a lot lower to the ground, obviously. So we had a height issue there, but we were getting over top of our corn and beans before they were up knee high, so it worked really well. In order to make that work, we'd have to remove some coulters. So we've got the coulters that we removed here with orange tape, and that way we would fit between the 30-inch row spacings of the corn. It did allow us to use a lot different seeds. We find that broadcasting just on top of the ground works really well with small seeds. The germination rate's a lot better. Using a unit like this, we could get a lot bigger seed in the ground, such as, you know, your peas and things that produce more nitrogen or more biomass. It worked pretty well, but it was a short window because that corn would shoot right up, you know, in that growth stage. So has its benefits. It worked. It got us going, but we had to come up with something new. So we kind of went to the next step. Now that we've established that cover crops work, and we've been figuring out how to make them work in our farm with our cattle, and with the crops trying to get higher organic matter and better soil biology, we decided we could invest some money. So then what we really wanted too was a nice comfortable sprayer. We were sick of the pull type. So this unit here got modified. You know, we had to turn the tank sideways so we could keep the liquid on it. And then we added an air seeder back here. The air seeder is ground driven to where the liquid is driven by radar. So that allowed us to be able to spray at different speeds, still be able to interseed and not have to worry about the seed, because the seed would just happen automatically. So with this unit though, we're allowed to either put some drop tubes on and apply 28%, or we can spray some different micronutrients or foliar blends on corn or soybeans or whatever we're doing. And then we'd be able to seed at a lot more corn heights because we've got these tubes here that the seed actually blows out of. So this gives us a lot bigger window for, you know, V3, V4 corn all the way up to V5, 6. We've even been in corn that probably shouldn't have because we couldn't hardly see over top of it. Surprisingly, extremely little damage with tall corn, but we don't like to be in tall corn because those covers need to be on the ground and growing much earlier in the season. When they're early in the season, they germinate, they sit there and kind of get shaded out by the corn, and they're alive and they're spindly and small. And then in the fall, when the corn starts drying down, those covers take right off. Then they start, you know, utilizing nutrients that the corn is done using. So that's when it starts saving that nitrogen up for next year and growing and producing a good cover crop. So I guess over here we can show you what other ideas that we've got. Obviously we have got the no-till drill here. It's pretty self-explanatory. We use that quite a bit, more and more, and we can kind of show you some different examples. We have experimented planting full season cover crops and grazing them, and it's working out really well for us. We can look at some of that later. Another thing that we've been using lately is this tall top dresser, designed really for putting urea over top of corn. But we've done some modifications to it, pretty simple ones, and now we can actually mix urea and our cover crop seed, or just be able to put cover crops on with just this unit alone. That saves us an extra pass across the field. We're putting it on at a better time at the V4 area for corn. It's worked really well. We're really liking using this unit here. And then of course the spreader truck, pretty self-explanatory there. Another good use, such as right now what we're doing, is we're taking off sorghum sudan as baleage, and we'll go through with that truck and we'll top dress it with 60 pounds of urea and mix our cover crop seed in, and then that cover crop is established and growing excellent by the fall, and we can go from there with it and decide what we want to do with that cover crop next spring. So maybe now we can go check out some covers and corn and kind of show you what we've been looking and learning at. Well, as you can see, what we started with is some pretty light, really fine sand, very hard to keep moisture in, very hard to grow decent crops in. The only way to change that is to get higher organic matter, and that's kind of where we started with what do we do to make this sand produce. So maybe we can look in the field here out of this alleyway and see what the dirt looks like. This alfalfa plant here is actually another experiment that we're doing. So we could fit 60 acres of corn seed in our corn planter, and what I did is I dumped 10 pounds of alfalfa seed in there just to kind of see what it would do. And we're finding lots of this alfalfa all over the field, in the row and outside the row. It is an old air planter, so I can see how it's getting blown outside of the row, but that's working good for us. It's giving us some good ideas. This alfalfa is really kind of making me happy that it's growing that good. Might be something that we use in the future for something else, or maybe we'll just keep doing it like that. Little history on this field here. I would say about 10 years ago we acquired this farm, and this was burnt up hay ground. One cutting maybe of grass hay. There were dead spots, bare spots, just like the rest of the farm, super sandy. Now today we're growing fairly decent corn on here. We're increasing the soil organic matter. We're gaining ground on soil health. This soil is actually extremely healthy. We can tell by a lot of residues being eaten up fast by microorganisms. What else we're seeing too is we've had less than 4 inches of rain this summer since we planted this corn. So obviously we're holding more water. 1% soil organic matter will hold 27,000 gallons of water, and it's starting to show. Also, there's $650 worth of nutrients in 1% organic matter. So when we first started in this field, we were below 1% organic matter. I think we've been in a crop rotation with covers for 7 years now, and we're just above 2%. And I think we just introduced cattle into this field probably 2 years ago. So we'll probably be on the right path in about 4 years to seeing this corn be where we want it to be, and that's top yielding. So seeing a lot of gaining ground here and a lot of economic savings, just with a little bit of cover crops, and then adding the cattle is like a whole another step. One thing I should mention too, it might be known that we are completely no-till. I see no-till and cover crops, they work hand in hand together extremely well. If you take one out, you seem to lose more than half of the benefits of the other one. I know a lot of guys that no-till without cover crops and they're not happy. There's a lot of surface compaction that goes on. They're not seeing the water infiltration. But once you mix the no-till and cover crops, and we start seeing everything work together, you start seeing soil health in general grow, and then you start seeing yields and payback, which is really what we're all about.
Thanks, Jack and Christina. I really appreciate your experience with cover crops and all the ingenuity that went into building all that equipment. That was a great introduction to all the history of cover cropping at that farm. I'm Sarah Franzak. I'm an environmental management educator with Extension, and I work out of Hillsdale County, but I have a statewide appointment. I'm here to help farmers reach their environmental goals on their farms, so feel free to contact me. Next, we're going to visit the North Central Research Site, and Paul Gross will discuss the challenges of interseeding cover crops in corn.
Hi, I'm Paul Gross. I'm an extension educator in Central Michigan, specializing in cover crops and soil health. And I'm at the North Central Region Research Site just north of St. John's, talking about cover crops today. And what we're going to talk about here is interseeding cover crops in corn. You know, one of the big challenges that farmers have and advocates of cover crops is how do we get cover crops established in a growing crop. If we're really going to make progress, we need to figure out ways to establish cover crops in our standing corn if we're really going to add the acres that we'd really like to add. I'd first like to point out that, like a lot of places in the Midwest and primarily in Michigan, I want to point out the deer damage. Even on research stations, they have challenges with deer as well. So it's all over, and it just wanted to point out some of the damage you see. But I'm going to talk about, if you look down, you'll see the cover crops. In this particular plot, cover crop mixture was put in about V5, about the first part of June. It was done with a modified tool to put it in with a rotary hoe seed head, so it stirred the seed a little bit. What we have here is we have a cover crop mix of oilseed radish, we have crimson clover. So as you can see, we put this in and we really start to get some pretty decent establishment. One of the challenges that we have when we interseed cover crops into standing corn, one of the considerations is we have to plan for our herbicide applications, because not all herbicides are compatible with certain cover crop species. So that's one of the considerations you have to think about. The other thing you have to think about is the timing to get them established. You also have to think about the species that you might select, because some species, if you see inside the corn rows here, you can see after this corn gets pretty good height to it, it does a lot of shading. So you really need to pick species that are shade tolerant early in the season, and they can establish themselves, establish their root systems, and get going and grow under the canopy until this corn starts to senesce. Now, a lot of the researchers will say that when corn starts to senesce, when those leaves beneath the ear leaf senesce down, that's when you get about 50% canopy. So once this corn starts to senesce in mid to late August, all of a sudden you're going to see that some of these species that got established and rooted in, once they get a hold of that sunlight, they're going to take off and really start to grow. I do want to show you one of the crimson clover. I dug out roots of crimson clover. You can see that the crimson is pretty well established. We've got about 3 to 4 inches of root here. We have little nodules, so it's actually going to work. If this was a corn-on-corn rotation, the possibility of adding some nitrogen for next year's crop is a real possibility. Now you can see the oilseed radish have gotten quite a bit larger. And you know, one of the things that we'll know about oilseed radish is they're going to get large, but they're going to put that taproot down. They're going to provide some of that diversity in that system. The other thing that we want to consider when we have these cover crops, we want to have them stay small enough so they don't compete with your primary crop. So when we establish, we pick seeding rates, we pick species that are adaptable under a canopy. We also want to consider, another thing that I like to consider, because I've seen oilseed radish doesn't handle harvest very well when you travel over top of them. They seem to get destroyed. But if you pick a clover that is a fibrous root, it handles harvest well, it can go through the winter, and it can help you start establishing covers to provide that soil health, that soil protection that we're after by planting cover crops. And interseeding cover crops, in this particular experiments, we're looking for ways and opportunities to interseed into standing corn. And I think this is a kind of a good example of some of the things that we can do, but we still need to continue to work in developing the mechanism to get these covers established.
Thanks, Paul. And what a great example of a partnership between MSU Extension and the Agro Expo virtual farm tours here taking place at the North Central Research Site. If you are interested in looking at any more of our videos, all education around cover crops, or any of the additional videos that Agro Expo has created for the virtual farm tours, please get on their YouTube channel. The link will be here. You'll receive this link after our event is over with. And you can take a look at some soil health videos that we've created, but also interseeding into some skip row corn plantings. I just wanted to take a second, do a little housekeeping. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions or concerns, please enter those into the chat box that's on your bottom row. You'll see there that pops up the ribbon. My name is Monica Jean. I'm a field crops educator based out of Clinton County, and I'm covering the southern central tier of that area, including Shiawassee, Saginaw Bay, Midland, and Gratiot counties. I, before this position though, was stationed up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I happen to have one leftover grant up there. It's a conservation innovation grant where we're looking at implementing soil health management practices in the UP. And as maybe you can predict, one of the most difficult things our UP farmers have to deal with is timing. And I'll give you a hint. Pretty much, if you don't put it in during the season, you're not going to get it in at the end. So let's take a look and see how these UP farmers are getting it done.
Hey everybody, this is James Decker with Michigan State University Extension. Today we're out in the field checking out our NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant Project looking at cover crop interseeding in corn. So today I'm sitting here under the canopy in Stevenson, Michigan on the Havelka Dairy Farm. And this is a field that we interseeded cover crops, and right now we're looking at crimson clover. So this corn, silage corn, was planted on May 13th this spring. And then we came back on June 18th and interseeded cover crops. We built a special tool with an APV interseeder, air seeder, excuse me, and put that on a toolbar with some S-tines and drag chains. That allowed us to come into the corn about V4, or when it was about this high, and interseed the cover crops. So we actually put 3 different cover crop treatments out here. We did some triticale, some annual rye grass, and then also this crimson clover. And what we found at this point in the year as the corn is starting to tassel and pollinate is that really the crimson clover seems to have done best this year. And we're probably in one of the better spots for the crimson clover, where we've got a good stand of clover, not too many weeds, and it looks like the clover is going to probably be able to persist and still be there in the fall after we take off the silage. In other spots in the field, we've had more challenges, and mostly related to weeds. This field has a decent seed bank of grass weeds. Looks like maybe some quack grass or crabgrass, and also a little bit of foxtail. And in those areas where we had a lot of weed pressure, the weeds seem to have taken over the cover crop, particularly in the grasses, in the triticale and in the annual rye. Crimson clover seems to have fared a little bit better than the 2 grass species, so we'll see how it does going forward. Some of the issues with the way that we interseeded these cover crops that we might reconsider in the future for the second year of this project next year. The way we have our interseeder set up right now, it's cultivating with S-tines in front of the seeder. The air seeder is blowing the seed down on that loosened soil, and then we've got drag chains coming behind and covering it up. And we thought that would be a great adaptation on an air seeder to get that seed actually into the soil and get seed-soil contact and not worry about moisture on top being a problem for establishment. But it actually seems like that may have been a negative in this case for 2 reasons. Perhaps some of that small seed, particularly on the annual rye, maybe even the triticale, got covered up a little bit too deep, and we didn't get the kind of establishment that we wanted because of that. Also, those S-tines are disturbing the soil right before we're seeding, which means that any weeds or weed seeds that are in that soil or rhizomes from grasses are going to be ready to grow as soon as we are done with that operation. And in the areas where we ran the air seeder, the second flush of weeds seems to be worse, and we do have a lot of weeds competing with the cover crop. So that could be a challenge. In the past, we've used the air seeder without any incorporation. And we don't have the weed problem, there's not disturbance there, but you oftentimes have a failed cover crop because of a lack of soil moisture in that very top layer. Or sometimes the cover crop will even germinate and then terminate after it dries out if you just get a little bit of rain. After looking at just broadcast air seeding with some incorporation, we're kind of wondering what the next step will be. And I know there are tools out there like the Penn State interseeder that actually drills cover crop in between the corn rows, and you would avoid excessive soil disturbance that would lead to weed problems, and also get good seed soil contact at that setup. So we continue to innovate, just like the grant title, Conservation Innovation Grant, and try new things here in Menominee County in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, looking at cover crop interseeding this year.
I'm Scott Havelka, and this is my son Matthew.
So what kind of farm do you guys have?
Dairy farm. Milk about 100 and we farm about 850.
We're standing out in this area where we did some alfalfa and corn intercropping, and you've just walked through and gotten to see the clean alfalfa plots where we are standing right now, some of the mixed plots of corn and alfalfa, and then the corn only. What's your general impression of how the corn and alfalfa are doing right now?
Pretty impressed with how the alfalfa itself is doing, and with it interseeded in with the corn for a stand. Looks pretty good right now.
Corn is a little stunted from where it is, but it looks halfway decent yet though.
Something that you think might be a benefit for your soil?
Well, you got your dirt covered with the alfalfa out here,
Less
so
erosion.
you're saving on erosion.
It's hard in the UP to fit in timing to do any cover crops unless you're doing them interseeded or intercropped like this. Do you think that the interseeded area, that's advantageous compared to like if you were going to try to fit in a cover crop after you take corn off?
I don't know if a cover crop, it's kind of late for putting cover crops in the fall though, so I think it's kind of a tough gig for doing cover crops in the fall after harvest, I would think. I don't know.
Do you ever get any rye or anything after corn comes out?
We never do, no.
Yeah. Well, I would assume, most UP farmers don't.
They struggle, yeah.
So this is, for you, it's almost the only way that you get a cover crop.
Yeah.
in, huh?
You know,
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that really good report from the UP. It's nice to hear how farms have been able to improve their cover crop efficiency just by paying attention to those details and have the ability to get those cover crops planted on time. Timing is so critical for all of our cover crops. It's not only a challenge in the UP, but it's really where they have such a short growing season, but it's really a challenge across the entire state. My name is Phil Cates. I'm an extension educator based in Lapeer County. I have regional responsibilities for field crops and also statewide responsibilities as a forage educator. I work with farms throughout the Thrum region, including the next farm we're going to visit. And this is the farm of Rich and Beverly DRC. They're located on the border of Tuscola and Sanilac counties near Kingston. Rich has been able to achieve, I think, great results on his farm. They have improved their soil health because of the combination of manure, cover crops, and no-till, and that combination has allowed them to really do well. So join me now as we listen to their story.
My name is Rich DRC. I farm here in the Kingston area with my wife Beverly. Farm about 2,000 acres. Corn, non-GMO soys, some of the corn's non-GMO too. Dry edible beans and wheat. We've been working with no-till, trying to incorporate it more and more for about 30 years. Incorporating covers into the program in the last 7 to 10 years. Okay, the main reason we use cover crops is the root system enhances the soil structure. In the spring of the year, it draws excess moisture out of the ground, puts it back into the atmosphere, and you've already got life in the soil. The roots are exuding nutrients and stuff into the soil to feed the bacteria. Seems like the fields planted into a green cover just get off to a much faster start than the fields that go into bare ground.
So what kind of yields have you been able to achieve, and have the cover crops helped?
Different crops, like soybeans, lend themselves very well to no-till. We feel we run very comparable to the neighbors. Anytime I talk to them, we're right in the ballpark. And we're growing non-GMO beans, so if there's a yield drag there, it's the cover crops must be helping offset it because we're right there with them.
You were averaging the last few years, where would you average your soybean crop as far as yield?
19 was a little bit off. I think we averaged 46 or 47. 18 was a phenomenal soybean year. We were 72 bushel across the board on our soys. Every year is different. 20 is looking pretty good. Wheat, we've no-till wheat for 35 years, and we've got a 10-year average of about 107 bushel to acre, which we feel is very good for our area. In 2020, we were down a little bit on wheat, but we had half the acreage did not receive a drop of rainfall from June 5th till the day we harvested. So when you go 35 days with no moisture, that's kind of tough on filling the kernels.
Okay. Have you changed your nutrient plan because of cover crops? Have you reduced or increased any fertilizers?
Our overall fertility program, the pounds of P and K that we put out is still very comparable, but we get a very high percentage of those nutrients now come from the dairy application, the dairy manure application after wheat harvest. There's enough nutrient in that 10 to 12,000 gallon range to pretty much carry you at least 3 or 4 years out of a 5-year rotation.
Great.
We're not buying as much dry granular anymore.
Herbicides, have they been something that you've increased or decreased because of cover crops?
The herbicide application cost, we don't feel that we're spending any more. We've tweaked the system a little bit. The cover crop, well, you see soybeans as an example, the cover crop will be terminated along with the residual herbicide application, this 5 to 10 days after planting. So at that point we have a cover crop that's going to die. It's going to act as cover for another month. The residual herbicide is out there at that point. We use metribuzin dual. There's some pretty good generics that do the job. About 50% of our soybeans we touch up with a post application. But that means about 50% of the soys we don't have to touch up. So we're not having to make a second trip over everything. Scouting gets a little bit more intense. Anytime you try to save money, you have to earn it. Corn, the herbicide cost I don't think has changed at all. The non-GMO corn, we have to spend a little bit more because we don't have the option of coming back with a Roundup application in the summer.
Rich, let's take a look at some crops.
Sounds good. Okay, this was a wheat crop harvested mid-July. This field got about 12,000 gallon of liquid dairy manure, lightly incorporated with a joker. We're not positive that's the best tool yet, but it does do pretty good. We came in probably about 48 hours later and seeded a mix of, we got buckwheat, we got pearl millet, we've got volunteer wheat, obviously. Down in here we got rape that's coming, radish, and then there's 3 or 4 clovers. There's some yellow blossom sweet clover, some crimson clover, and some June clover. They will be a little bit slower. They get a little start in the fall, but they actually come on better in the spring because obviously the pearl millet and the buckwheat and the oats will not come back in the spring. So in the spring we end up having some winter wheat and some clovers coming up, and then we'll no-till corn right into this field. This particular field will actually be grazed off. They'll be putting cattle on it probably in about a month. Rich DeArce here again. For anybody that was in our area here last year in September, we had a field day to show some of the covers that Michigan State had planted in along with some of ours and some plots. This is the same field, field 55. This is no-till corn. We happen to be near electric pole where we had to go around the pole. Basically from the time the plat day was held, we did nothing to the field last fall except let everything grow. Standing here, we've got, this is an example, we've got turnip carcasses left from last year. I see there's some radish carcasses, we've got rape stems, and still have a lot of the wheat stubble and stuff in here too. The part that we find seems to work pretty good is the more stuff you can have suck up that liquid manure, tie it up in a fibrous form and deteriorate very slowly, it just adds to the soil health. It just keeps the soil covered a little bit more. We did have a little problem last year. It was such an interesting fall. With the combination of the liquid manure, the turnips got so big that, and we had so much cover, that when we did get the hard freeze mid-December, we were finishing corn harvest, that was the only really hard freeze that the soil had all winter. And the turnips survived, and we come out this spring and we had turnips that were anywhere from 5 to upwards of 8 inches across. We actually brought the planter out in April with no seed in it just to see if the row cleaners would knock them out of the way. We've never had the turnips survive like that.
It sounds like you're a real believer of cover crops and that they help your soil health. What would you tell other people about that?
As far as telling other people about it, you've got to try it until you see the benefits of a couple of years. It's just hard to imagine. But when you plant into a green cover, the whole dynamics are different. You can get a heavy rain shortly thereafter. The cover crop just helps protect the ground. The ground doesn't crust, it doesn't seal over. Emergence is much better in a cover crop situation.
Hello everyone, my name is Ricardo Costa. I am a field crops educator located in Southwest Michigan. While watching this video, it was great to see that Rich is so pleased with his cover crops and he can see all the benefits of adding them to his cropping system. Now, moving on to the next section, we are going to the MSU Kellogg Biological Station that is located in Hickory Corners between Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, where Dr. Dean Bass, Dr. Renner, and Caleb will be talking about all the research going on there in interseeding cover crops. They will talk about their findings on timing, mixtures, species, and seeding rates. Please remember their research is still in its early stages, so more research is necessary for them to have more conclusive data. Dr. Bass, Dr. Renner, and Caleb, the floor is yours.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dean Bass, Sustainable Ag Educator for Michigan State University Extension. We're standing here at the W.K. Kellogg Biological Station, one of MSU's AgBioResearch centers, and we're here to talk about the research we have going on in interseeding. Karen?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Karen Renner. I'm a professor at Michigan State, and one of the areas that I have an opportunity to work in is with cover crops, and we've been doing some work with interseeding.
I'm Caleb Ordner. I'm the graduate student working on this project of getting a better interseeding system set up.
Okay, so we've been working on interseeding at MSU for a few years, as has other universities, and we work at various farmers' locations. Most of those farmers are currently interseeding, and we've had the opportunity to work with them. We've looked at timing of interseeding, we've looked at interseeding species, we've looked at how much seed you should put on per acre, what do you do if you have a mixture. So those are some of the areas that we worked in over the last 3 years. Today we're at KBS, Kellogg Biostation. It's mid-August, you can see by the corn behind us. It's a gorgeous day here, and we thought we'd come down and look to see how our interseeding treatments went. So in this particular field, we have a couple things going on. We seeded 2 different mixtures. One mixture winter kills, and one mixture does not. So Caleb, what was the mixture that we seeded that was winter killed, or will be winter killed?
The winter kill mix was radish, oats, and peas. We planted the oats at about 25 pounds per acre. The peas was about 20 pounds per acre, and the the radish was 2 pounds per acre.
So we have a winter killed cover mixture in here that we'll look at in a moment. And then we have a winter hardy cover crop mixture that we also established. And Caleb, what did we put in for the winter hardy?
The winter hardy mix is annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and dwarf Essex rape.
Okay, so we've got annual ryegrass, and the seeding rate on that is?
8 pounds per acre.
About 8 pounds per acre. And when you're buying annual ryegrass cover crop seed, you want to be sure you get that from a source that you know that is pure seed and doesn't contain some weeds that we don't want. So we have annual rye, and then we have crimson clover seeded at?
That's also at 8 pounds per acre.
8 pounds. And then the last cover we had, so you think about, we have a grass, we have a legume type cover, and then the third is more a brassica species. So dwarf Essex rape at 1.3 pounds. And then we have a few other things going on out here. We're looking at seeding over pen pack manure versus areas of the field that were not spread with pen pack manure. And we're doing some other types of operations to see if we can get how the soil surface influences establishment of the cover crops. So we'll stop here and we'll go in the corn. It's a little damp this morning. If you're wondering why I'm standing here and looks like I'm in a rain outfit, it's because the corn is damp this morning, a little bit of dew. Okay, so we walked in here, and Dean's behind the video. I'm standing here, you can probably see myself, and Caleb's off to the side. We're doing social distancing, as you all know what we need to do this summer. So if Dean focuses down, we're standing in the winter kill, and you should be able to see in his view frame some radish, some oats, and then there's a pea. So these are planted 6 weeks ago, and you can see that we've got the radish germination and emergence was good. They're doing well. Peas, we'd prefer to see like one every 2 to 3 square feet. You know, when you think about a seeding rate and you transfer it to what you have on a square foot basis, if you're seeding down, think about peas and how big the seed is, and then think about 1 pound or 2 pounds of that seed, or 5 pounds. You can see you're not going to have like a carpet of peas, and you're not going to have a carpet of radish, and you're not going to have a carpet of oats. Your goal is to have cover crop, you know, some cover crop there every square foot. We're on a sandy soil here, we're not irrigated, and so we're at a corn population around 30,000. You can still see the light coming in, so the cover crops still get some light to help them, and they get some moisture coming through the corn canopy. So we'll stop here and we'll walk over then and look at some winter hardy mix in this field. So now we're standing where we've seeded the winter hardy mix, and that would be annual ryegrass because that overwinters and will keep growing next spring. We seeded crimson clover, which sometimes overwinters and sometimes does not, just depending on the winter we have, and dwarf Essex rape. And you can see the 3 species in the view, and this, we're standing where we're in no-till, but without any pen pack, and so this field was in wheat probably last year, just looking at the residue. So you can see what's going on, and then as the corn senesces, they'll get more light, and as it cools off in the September, October, the cover crops like it, so they take off and grow a lot. And what you're seeing above ground is what you see, but what you don't see is what's going on below ground. And a lot of the reasons why we're looking at cover crops in systems is to improve soil health, soil microbial diversity, and having 4 different species here that are desirable: corn, dwarf Essex rape, annual ryegrass, and crimson clover. That's good for the soil health, for the soil microbial community. So this is one of them, and we'll look at the other establishments where we had pen pack and where we had tillage prior to planting corn.
So now we're in the treatment which is tilled with pen pack. You can see we got a really good catch of everything. I think really the combination of having it tilled so you have a better surface for seed soil contact, as well as having some nutrients from the pen pack, has really helped us get a well-established cover crop in this part of the field. Caleb, you want to tell everybody about how all of these cover crops have been interseeded in these plots?
Yeah, so this field we're looking at two different kind of soil treatments, where we took a Gandy air seeder where we actually blew the seed just right on the soil surface, and that's kind of a typical broadcast interseeding system. And then we also have a John Deere rotary hoe where we took off a few sections so that we could allow the corn to go between the two sections, and we broadcasted the seed in front of the rotary hose, and those rotary hoes actually came back and worked the soil up and kind of worked the soil or the seeds into the soil a little bit, so they had a little bit better seed to soil contact. So that's some of the reasons why we have such a good establishment here rather than just having a typical broadcast system where the seed's just laying there on the soil surface, and if you don't get the rain, that those seeds might germ and then they don't get the roots established to get down because they don't have that good seed to soil contact.
You have any comments as far as what you've seen on the differences between how some of these cover crops grow, Caleb?
Yeah, we did another experiment where we actually grew some of these cover crops in a growth chamber where we could control every environment, and everything just, we could only grow it for 2 weeks before everything, that's as big as we could allow them to get before they would be too big. But the only one that didn't seem to do as great in that mix was the dwarf Essex rape. Everything else was all probably 4 or 5 inches tall, and the rapeseed was just barely getting out of the cotyledon stage when we were getting to that 2-week mark. So it definitely has quite a bit slower growth pattern compared to all the other crops, cover crops in these mixes.
We're now here in the treatment which is tillage without pen pack, and again you can see we have a really nice catch, and I think this points out some of the trade-offs that we have when we get into working with cover crops, building soil health. We don't encourage tillage because that does destroy soil health, soil structure. And we encourage the use of cover crops, and this is an example where we have to look at the trade-offs. You might not get quite as good a catch with your cover crops, but you don't destroy the soil structure versus destroying some soil structure, some soil organic matter, and getting a better catch. With those types of trade-offs, you have to really be careful. You have to look at all the goals you're looking at using cover crops for and deciding the best way to achieve those goals. But remember, we do have compromises even when we're using cover crops.
Hello everyone. I'm Paul Gross. I'm an extension educator in Central Michigan, soil health, cover crops, and the northern part of the Central Michigan. So really excited to see the virtual tour. And Dean was right from the get-go that coming on a virtual farm tour like this, we can get to see different parts of the state and some of the challenges that they have. It's really interesting, the innovation that the farmers have implemented on their farms, the tools and equipment, and some of the things they've done to solve the mystery, solve the challenges of interseeding cover crops and sand and corn. And you know, it's interesting that the successes that they've had. Always asked to reach out to those farmers, those educators that were on those videos to help get those questions answered for more clarification. We're going to work through some questions that are in the chat box, but first I'd like to kind of acknowledge some of the individuals and organizations that have supported the MSU cover crop program over the years. We're really grateful for some of the opportunities that they have given us, providing us with seed, with funds to do some of this research that's very important. Next, Renee's going to put another poll up. we still like to gather information. I'd ask you to fill that out so we can get more information. Helps guide our research and helps guide our programming for cover crops for the cover crop team. So we really appreciate if you'd fill that out as we move forward. What I'm going to do then is start to move toward the questions in the chat box. What I'd like to do is go through them. There's a number of questions in the chat box. If you still have extra questions, please put them in, and then we'll try to get them answered before we go into our breakout rooms. So I'd also like to acknowledge, you'll see on the screen, the cover crop team, both on campus and off. These individuals really support work and provide the research and leadership in cover crop education that we have here at MSU. So we're real grateful for that. So I'm going to go in and into the chat box and start asking some of the questions that have been put in. I think I can maybe try to assign some of those. One of the first questions is shade tolerance. Where can we get the information on the shade tolerant species? And I think I'm going to direct that to Karen, Dr. Renner. I know you've done some work on that. So Karen?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hi out there. I recognize some of the names in the list on my big screen. So yeah, shade tolerance. So we searched a lot for information on that, just across all sorts of resources, and it's really tough to find that. Some of the work that Caleb is doing, Ortner, in the growth chamber, we're looking at shade and no shade and looking how species respond. So as a lot of you know, crimson clover appears to be a decent clover species for in the shade. That's why you see a lot of people using it. Annual rye grass does well in the shade, and radish does too, and so does turnip. But all of them do better in the sun. But when we're in an interseeded system, we get shade. So we're working on that, and others are too. But experience is a good teacher, as many of you know. Some seem to do better and some don't. So I'll stop there.
Karen, I want to follow up with just a little question that came about the cereal rye versus the annual ryegrass in your study. Probably shade tolerance. Is there a reason you picked one versus the other then?
We just opted for annual ryegrass for some reasons other than shade tolerance, but annual rye or cereal rye work okay, as many are on this call this morning, and they could chime in, and we just have a blow up here of our audio, but both will work well. Some growers prefer annual ryegrass, some growers prefer cereal rye.
Thank you, Karen. The next question is what rates were used, and I think that was after the North Central region video. So Dean, I think you led the planning of that plot.
Yes, I did. We planted that plot there, and the crimson clover radish mix, we did a typical 60-40 mix on that. Crimson clover at 60% and the radish at 40%. And what those are the percentage of the normal seeding rate per acre that you would find in a lot of the literature. So in the case of the crimson clover, that's about 8 pounds per acre at 60%. And for the radish, it's 3 pounds per acre. And I'd like to point out, these rates are pure live seed. So make sure you check your seed tag. Particularly crimson clover can get you because there's crimson clover out there that can have as much as a 40% coating on it. So if you don't adjust for those types of things, your seeding rate can get low, and that may be why some people are not quite getting the results they'd like to get.
Thanks, Dean. The next question you might want to just jump in on is what variety of plants would you recommend for broadcast seeding?
When it comes to broadcast seeding, we like to tend towards the smaller seeds. We find it's much more difficult to get the large seeds established from broadcast. Things like peas, beans, a lot of those bigger seeds. You don't get enough seed soil contact just setting them on top of the surface, and they're also really appetizing to the critters around that are looking for something to eat. Pretty easy to see. So We've had our best success with some of the smaller seeds like crimson clover, red clover. Annual rye grass, again, is a smaller seed. Also, the cereals do really well too. So oats, cereal rye, wheat, barley. It's when you get into some of the bigger, what I'd call more exotic seeds, you may have some problems with those.
Thanks, Dean. Good practical information. I think I'm going to draw on Dr. Renner or maybe Dr. Sprague to catch the next question. What are some of the herbicide programs used for the corn interseeding fields? It seems like it's a big hurdle.
Yep, I'll let Christy talk on that one. We have a fact sheet and we've looked a lot at that.
Thanks, Karen. As Karen mentioned, we do have a fact sheet, and we have really done a lot of work looking at the various pre-emergence herbicides as well as post-herbicides that can be used, and really kind of focused on the annual ryegrass as well as kind of the tillage radish. And there are quite a few different programs. One of the key things is, particularly if you're going to be seeding in grass, a lot of our pre-herbicides like things like Dual, some of the acetochlor products like Harness, a lot of times we do not get good establishment because we don't have enough time between that and some of the interseeding. Some of the applications early in the season, and if you're doing some later season, basically, you know, kind of just before harvest, you might be able to get away with. But we do have a good fact sheet that is in the back of the MSU weed control guide that does outline a lot of the products that can be used on some of those different cover species that we've looked at.
And I'll just add, like if you're just interseeding one single species, it's a little bit easier to come up with a herbicide program, as you might think. If you're interseeding a mixture, it's much more difficult to come up with a herbicide program. Christy has a breakout session on weed control, and that will be recorded. So if you're in a different breakout session, you can always pick that one up later, and I'm sure they'll have a discussion on that.
Okay, thank you. Another question, I think this is from Rich's video. Phil, I think maybe you can touch on this. Any problems planting green? Any tips for someone trying it for the first time?
Thanks, Paul. Unfortunately, Rich wasn't able to join us today. They had a death in the family, and so they, my sympathies to them, but I'll try and answer your question. Some of the things that I've seen in the thumb area is if we have a grass like a cereal rye that's planted in the fall and then going to corn in the spring, if we have a long period of wet, cool weather, the cereal rye continues to grow. It really seems to jump, and if it gets too big, then we have a challenge of trying to terminate that rye, plant the corn into soils that have rye that might be 4 or 5 feet tall. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I've seen about planting green.
Okay, thanks, Phil. The second part of that question is interseeding vetch, and I think I'm going to try to toss that one to Dan Brainerd because I think he has the most experience with vetch.
Okay, let's see. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I've not done that for a while. We've used, so vetch I think is not as shade tolerant as things like clover. It's also a bigger seed, so some of the challenges people brought up with that are important to keep in mind. Depending what other crops you're growing, it can also be a weed. So if you're a grower of winter wheat, for example, that's a dangerous one to get involved with. On the plus side, nitrogen fixer, we had pretty good luck establishing it in vegetables, which don't intercept as much light as corn. So I've never tried it in denser field crops, but my guess is it would not perform as well as the clovers, certainly as a legume source, but might be a little bit better at suppressing weeds, and you get a little bit more vigorous growth in the spring and more nitrogen early, depending what your rotational crop is. It could be a good fit.
Thanks, Dan. I know that I've had a little experience with vetch in row crops, and it is a great nitrogen producer, but there's some challenges is in managing it. There's also some challenges with hard seed, and it doesn't mix well with winter wheat crops as well. So good information. Thank you. I'll kind of throw this out to the team. In what situations would you not recommend interseeding?
I'll jump in. So like the guys in the thumb that are on 22-inch rows for sugar beet or for other reasons, we did some early work in 22s and we ran into some issues with that. The canopy was so dense, we couldn't get good cover establishment even with rains, and that canopy closed so quickly that when it did rain, not much of the rain reached the soil surface. So my experience, which is limited, I'm not from the thumb and I don't grow corn and interseed in the thumb, was 40,000 population, especially in 22-inch rows. We had some more difficulties. I wouldn't do it, but maybe some people on would say, yo, we do it and we're good.
Paul, I'm going to say that when we are looking at interseeding, we had very poor results in 2019, and that was because it was so dry. We planted the seed and had extended periods of really dry weather, and so there was no germination on that seed. It just stayed in the soil, and so because of that, we had very poor emergence and a limited amount of cover crops after harvest, which sometimes you have a crop failure. Sometimes it doesn't work exactly the way you want, and so that was one of the challenges that we had.
And I would echo that because we've been doing interseeding with farmers across the state and ourselves for like 5 years now. And we get a dry year like what Phil's saying, and we struggle. And that's why James DeDecker, ourselves, and that's why we're looking at different types of ways to establish interseeding. We certainly know we can drill and get usually a very good interseeded stand, but a lot of growers are interested in something a bit different than a drill. And you get a dry year and seed on the surface, and that's problematic.
And we also had an issue in with Jack Thornton, and he's not on, but Greg White, our local NRCS, is on, and we had the opposite. We had a great year. We had wonderful weather, and we did it in soybeans, and the cover crops actually got too large. We interseeded it, and they took off. So there was an issue there with the cover crop being taller than the beans at harvest time, so you also have to watch it from that angle too, make sure it doesn't get out of hand.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'd love to just keep the conversation going, but we've got to move people into the breakout room. So Renee, would you share the results of the poll before we do that, if you would? Okay, so we can see a number of reasons why people are using, or why would they consider using cover crops. So this is great. So we're going to move into our breakout rooms now, and I'd like to remind everyone that they're going to last approximately 20 to 30 minutes, and we're not going to be coming back. So you can stay in there as long as you'd like. I'd like to remind the moderators to make sure you turn on the record on those sessions. The questions that were unanswered in the chat box will be answered. These recordings are all going to be placed online in the very near future. I'd also like to remind participants that in the chat box, you're going to have the opportunity to get your fill out the forms for your CCA credits, for your UP credits, and to fill out the evaluation. So really appreciate the questions, really appreciate the information, really appreciate the participation. So Renee, if you could put us into the breakout rooms where we can dig deeper into some of these topics, we'd appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.